One of the things that is necessary on the Edge Services Gateway in order to allow it to communicate externally is a interface that connects outbound. So right now, if we were to look over here on our virtual switch, right, we have a bunch of logical switches that are deployed. Let me go ahead and scoot this over just a little bit. We can see all of our logical switches that are created and all that type of stuff. However, you'll notice that there isn't really a uplink of any type to deploy to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a connection here. If we look through all of our port groups, we can see that none of these connections really are what we need them to be. So we don't have a VLAN ID associated with anything that's a trunk. So what I'm going to do, and it doesn't have to be a trunk, just so everybody knows, it just has to be an externally facing interface that we can point outbound, and they can listen for a VLAN ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the router that's running this environment currently, which is this guy right here. And I'm going to do a show IP interface brief. And I'm going to go to global config. I'm going to type in hostname is going to be NSX-V-RTR. So we know which device it is, because I've got this router here and this router here. NSX-T router for my NSX-T environment, which I'm currently deploying as well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to configure a subinterface for the transit connection. So I'm going to go to interface gig 2.100, encapsulation.1q100, IP address here will be 10.0.100. Do I want to do that, or do I want to do 10.1 10.10 0. There we go, dot 1, because then it'll be 10.100. It'll be VLAN 100 and /24. So do show IP interface brief. We have that there. What I'm going to go ahead and do now is I'm going to go over here to here. I'm going to create a new port group. I'm going to call this the NSX uplink. Click next. The VLAN ID for this guy will be 100. Click next and push it down. And what that's going to allow me to do is I'm going to actually, on the uplink, I'm going to click on actions, and then I'm going to add VMkernel adapter. I'm going to attach hosts, and the only host I need to attach this to is host 4. The reason why I only need to do it for host 4 is because host 4 is the only host that is going to be used as an exit point out of our environment. I'm going to click on OK. Click next. Configure the VMkernel adapter, nothing fancy. It's okay, there we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and static addressing. The address here will be 10.10.0. And I'll put in 14/24. And click on next. And actually, back up one. The gateway will be configure on the VMkernel adapter. The gateway will be 10.10.0.1. Click next and finish. Now that I have that done, I should be able to go back over here to this router and do ping 10.10.0.14. And that should respond. And there it goes. Cool thing about this is now is I can go to my NSX edges, click on the Edge Services Gateway, this guy right here, Edge 2, and I can go to Configure and then Interfaces, and I'm going to go ahead and adjust this guy, this VNIC 1. I'm going to go to Edit, and from here I'm going to say this is a uplink. I could configure it as a trunk if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to call this uplink, and I'm going to connect it to a distributed virtual port group of the NSX uplink. Click on OK. And the IP address for this, and this is going to be specifically on the ESG, is going to be 10.10.0. And I'll put in here .2. And I'm going to put a /24 gateway on that and click on Save. Okay, now that's getting pushed. And that'll take a couple of moments to do. Come over here, and if I hit the up arrow, now that's there. which is what I want to have. I'm going to go back over here to the NSX edges, and we're good. Now if I go back over here to ESG and I ping 10.10.0.1, it should be able to respond, which is what I'm looking for. Since that's able to respond, I should be able to, from my DLR, I should be able to, I'm sorry, the Edge Services Gateway, I should be able to, I need to configure routing now. I'm going to do some static routes so you guys can see what that looks like. It's not terribly involved to do, but we do definitely need to understand the workflow. So I'm going to come back over here, and basically the environment looks something like this. If I go to the summary tab, let me bump back once. If I was to draw this out, whoops, cancel, click on this guy, pull him out, and let's discuss basically what's happening here. What's basically happening is I have my DLR, and my DLR has a default route pointing this way to my Edge Services Gateway. On the Edge Services Gateway, I have a connection this way to the CSR1000v. This right here is the 10.10.0.0/24. This one here is the 172.29.11.0, and then I have the 172.29.1.0 and 172.29.2.0. What I basically need to do is I need to configure a static route on this guy that points this way to reach these two subnets. So my next hop on this guy right here, I'm going to put a static route on here that says in order to reach the 172.29.1.0 and 172.29.2.0 point to 10.10.0.2. That's going to be what I do there. Same thing with this guy. In order to reach 172.29.1.0 and 2.0, point this way to 172.29.11.2. On the DLR and the ESG, I both need a default route. So I'm just going to go and configure default routes that point this way. So the DLR is going to point to 11.1 and the ESG is going to point to 10.10.0.1. That's basically what we're going to configure, and that's going to allow us to tie all this stuff together where the CSR should be able to ping the Linux devices, and the Linux devices should be able to ping the CSR. That is our goal. So with that being said, let us go ahead and start breaking this down. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen while I'm at it. I'm going to work my way backwards first. So I'm going to pull up the CSRs. I'm going to go ahead and type an IP route to 172.29.1.0/24 to 10.10.10.0.2 and 172.29.2.0. Just like that. Do show IP route, and they are showing up in my 172.29. They're showing up in my routing table right there. Okay. On the ESG, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go to routing, static routes. I'm going to go ahead and click on add. And the network I'm trying to reach is going to be 172.29.1.0/24. And I can basically point it towards a transit link. And it's going to know which one to point towards. It's going to know where to go with that. I'm going to click on add. And I'm going to go add one more. I'm going to say 172.29.2.0/24. And this time here I'm going to put in here 172.29.11.2. So it knows which uplink to do. So I've got both variations put in here. I'm going to go ahead and publish those routes. So the ESG momentarily should have those static routes in place, which it does. Now the one that's local to me, I can see this one right here, the 172.29.1. You can see that the next hop is myself. So that may not work long term, but if I go down to the DLR and I do a show IP route, what I should be able to do is I should be able to ping. Let's go to LBM1. Go ahead and log into him. Theoretically speaking, I should be able to ping 10.10.0.1. And that's not working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the NSX edges. I'm going to edit this one here, because if we look at the Edge Services Gateway, we know that 172.29 is going across the transit link. I'm going to go ahead and edit this one, and I'm going to set the, I'm going to say none, and put the pointer to be 172.29.11.2. Click on Save and Publish. And the ESG also needs a default route. That's one thing I did not do initially. So the LBM, and there's the ping. The ping's working. So, and actually the default route doesn't need to be put into play there. And if I was to cancel this, and right now I don't have internet access, so I won't be able to do a trace route. So, but if I go back to my LBM3, go ahead and log into him, I should be able to ping 10.10.0.1 as well. Hopefully, maybe one day. So let me just make sure that ifconfig 172, yep, that's set up correctly. So on the DLR, I have a default gateway pointing towards 11.1. On the ESG, I don't have a default route pointing outbound. So what I'm going to do, technically speaking, I don't need a default because I have all my routes are specific. But let me go over here to my router, and let's do ping 172.29.1.11, and then we're going to do a 2.13. I can ping both ways. Let's go back over here to LV13 and try to ping that again. Kind of a weird snafu type of situation where it's not working here, but if I go over to the router and do trace to 172.29.2.13 numerically, I go to my Edge Services Gateway, to my DLR, and then eventually I hit my device. So whatever reason this guy doesn't like what he's seeing here, if I go to .2, the connection is kind of goofy. Not sure why that's giving me a hard time. Can I ping my gateway? Ping 172.29.2.1. Okay, I can ping that. Can I ping .11? That's weird. Okay, why is that not working? Let me go back to here and see if I made a mistake. Configure interfaces. Okay, well, everything seems to be correct. Let me just make sure that those LVM3, that's on the correct LVM4. Oh, that's because they both have the same IP address. 172.29.2. That's why it's not working. So let me go ahead and adjust this guy. Let's go to Actions. Actually, let me launch Web Console. They both have the same IP address. How that happened, I don't know, but they do. We're going to test out, once we get the rest of the routing in play, we're going to go ahead and test out DHCP and things like that. So you guys will see what that looks like. So we won't have to statically configure anything anymore. So I'm going to do an ifconfig. And sure enough, Doofenshmirtz configured the wrong IP. Let me go to Edit Connections. Edit this value. IPv4 settings, and then we're going to put him underneath 14. Click on Save and Close. So let me, is there a way to adjust that? Let me reboot, because I don't actually know how to reset it without going through and monkeying with it. But now that the IP address has changed, that'll reboot. It'll only take a second. But the cool thing about it is, once the box comes online, and if we were to change that out, so the same IP address is being triggered. Alright, so our IP address changed. We'll come up here and we'll ping that IP address again. And not sure why that's failing, but we can ping our gateway, and then we're going to try to ping. I may have to reboot this box as well, but not sure why that's giving me a hard time. So let's just make sure that everybody's connected to the same LS4 DL control connection 2. Oh, LS 5003. 5000. Okay, yeah, they are connected to the same box, which is good. All right, so everything seems to be working except for that ping from this guy. Can I ping my 172.29.2.13? Okay, I can ping that. I may have to just flush ARP, or yeah, I don't know how to look up ARP on here, but at this point we're in a pretty good spot, right? We don't really have a whole lot left to play with. All of our devices are squared away. We have connectivity from our environment northbound. So if I wanted to take this a step further, I have this router here, right? If I was to do show IP route, I do have a default. I can create a default route on here, and then for my connectivity on my core switch down, I could provide connectivity from that, meaning I can go ahead and create an IP route. Let's 10.255. Yeah, so I'm running OSPF. So what I could do is I could create an IP route to 10.255.1.21, and then I can on my core switch go ahead and log into it real quick. And actually, let me do it this way. Switch 1, I will log into him real quick. Do a show IP route. I don't see any of the 172.29 routes coming through, but if I was to create a static route on here and type an IP route 172.29.1.0/24 is reachable via, what's this guy's IP address? 22, 10.255.1.22, and 2. What I should be able to do ping is 172.29.1.11, and from the switch do show IP route. He's pushing the routes down, and that's because the fact that I don't have additional routing to point towards the 172.29.11 and so on and so forth. So if I was to actually come in here and say do show run pipe include IP route and pull out a couple of these static routes, let's pull this guy out here. And this is an actual physical Cisco switch, so I said to be careful how I configure it. I would type an IP route to 172.29.0.0/16 0.0 to 10.255.1.22, and then IP route to, actually that should be enough, do ping 172.29.1.11. So let's do a quick trace that to 172.29.1.11. Control-Shift-6. Let's do this a little bit differently. On a switch, you have to be a little more specific in your output. Take it a couple seconds for I've got domain names lookup on it, so that's what it's doing. I'm going to go ahead and do a trace route. IP target address would be 172.29.1.11. Source address is not relevant. Numeric display, yes. And it gets there, so it gets lost on 22. It gets lost on here, and it does a show IP route. And it's like, well, I don't know what to do. The simple thing to do with this would be to, and this is why I don't like static routing, would be to configure a dynamic routing protocol. So Control-Shift-6 on that. Ping 10.10.0.2. Yeah, see, that's the other thing. Let's show run pipe include IP route. Type in IP route to 10.10.0.0 /24 to 10.255.1.22 and retry that ping. Yeah, that should be working because I'm basically pointing to where it's got to go. So do show IP interface brief. I'm sorry, I need to point to, yeah, that's correct. Let me point to .1 first. Okay, that's what it's actually connected to. Let's do .1. Yeah, that works. And then from the rest of it, I need to, this is why dynamic routing comes into play, where I don't have to sit there and try to figure out how many different static routes. As you can see, it's a pain to try to get it all right. And then getting down to here, do show IP route static. You've got a bunch of static routes in here that you need to configure. Do show run pipe include IP route. Thought I got rid of all those. Okay. So theoretically speaking, I could pull these guys out. But I'm not going to worry about that. I just wanted to show you what it would look like if we were to try to get that operational. The only other thing that I could think of would be on the ESG. If we were to look at this guy, we don't have a default route on him. So if I was to come over here to NSX edges, let's go over to the ESG, and then underneath routing, I can say edit, and this will be a default gateway, will be my uplink, and the gateway IP will be, in this case here, will be 10.10.0.1. Click on save and publish. And if I come back over here and hit the up arrow, now my default gateway is there. That's complete now. So if I go back to my switch, which is this guy, that's reachable. And I bet you if I try to ping, let's do the trace route again. IP target address is going to be 172.29. The source address is going to be none. Numeric display, yes. That'll get there. Okay, that was the problem. So the default route on my Edge Services Gateway was incorrect, which means that if I go back to LVM1, whoops, somehow that got closed out. Let me close him. And let me pull this guy up here. Let me test to see if this is actually working. Let me go ahead and ping. Okay, that's working. That's good. What about ping 10.255.1.1? That's working. Let me ping Google. That's working. Can I ping google.com? So DNS is going to, if it doesn't work, it's going to take a couple seconds. I think I turned Google on, or DNS. But if not, not that big of a deal. LVM4, I'm pretty sure I did as well. Let me go test it real quick. So we basically have given ourselves internet access at this point in time. Ping 10.10.0.2. Okay, that's working. And then ping 10.255.1.1. That's working. We're going to go ahead and ping quad 8. That's working. And then ping google.com. So that's the only other, that's the thing that's like, it's not quite there yet. And I'm pretty sure I gave Control C. If I go over here to edit connections, come in here, edit, and then go under IPv4 settings. I did set Google as my DNS server. Cancel on that. That's what I thought, which is why I'm like, why are you giving me a hard time? Now, the ping should work. If I was to go to here, so I know it's able to reach out. So if I was to open up a web browser and go to Google, it should respond, but the ping should also work. So, not sure why that didn't trigger, but at least we have internet access. That's the key thing. So if I was to pull up my home PC and then bring this guy over and try to ping 172.29.2.14, I can ping it, which means I am pinging from my home lab into this environment. So if I was to pull up, say, let's close that, go to here, go to Google. DNS isn't quite working the way that I want it to. So I'm going to have to figure out why that's happening. But nonetheless, I have reachability. And that's really the bottom thing that I'm trying to make sure that I have working. So I'm happy with how far we've gotten in this video. We have internet reachability through a bunch of static routes and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just close this out because I don't really need to test that out. I do have reachability. I'm not sure why Google isn't working for DNS, but it is what it is. We're going to take a look at deploying OSPF in the next video and take a look at exactly how that comes into play. As you can see, there's a lot of things that need to be in play in order for this stuff to work. So with that being said, thanks so much for stopping by and hanging out with me, and I'll catch up with everybody else in the next video. So I went and was wondering why my connectivity to the internet was broken, and because it didn't make sense that a quad 8 ping would work, but a DNS lookup wouldn't work, even though I've got DNS configured. So problem is my firewall was completely maxed out on connections. So I just went and cleared con on my ASA firewall, and then I'm doing another ping, and it's completely working now. So if I was to pull up my Firefox, give that a couple seconds to pull up here, that should show that I have internet access on my VMs. Even though it's really slow, it should still work. There it goes. It's just taking its sweet old time. Remember, this is a virtual environment, so things go a little bit slower than they should. So there we go. So I'm actually going to stop that connection. And from here, I'm going to go google.com because it's a much lighter website. And there we go. So we have internet access in the virtual lab through NSX, which is what we want to have. So there we go. Just wanted to put a little note in there at the end here just because it didn't make sense why it wasn't working.